This is Duke University.
Hi everyone out there, my name is Max Lazar. I am a third-year Ph.D. student in modern European history and modern Jewish history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And joining me today is Robin Bullard, who is in the same position, also a third-year Ph.D. student in modern European and Jewish history at UNC Chapel Hill. So Robin, I'll ask you first if you could give us maybe a brief little description of what your project is about and how you came to actually focus on this topic.
Sure, yeah. So my dissertation topic is essentially Ottoman Jewish immigrants who left the Ottoman Empire as it was sort of receding or immediately after it fell and settled in France. So I'm looking at their experiences during the interwar period as well as during the Second World War. And specifically I'm asking how their particular linguistic and cultural backgrounds impact their experiences of integration as well as their experiences of survival during genocide. I did my master's thesis on Greek Jews during the Holocaust, specifically in Auschwitz. And I looked at how their linguistic background, their multilingual background, impacted survival.
A further question I want to ask you, as we're talking about this polyglot background, there is sort of this huge amount of languages spoken in the Mediterranean, but a language like French is something that, at least for me, sort of coming from an area outside of sort of former Ottoman studies in this case, it doesn't necessarily sound like it would be an immediate thing that would come in right here. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us then, what is sort of this connection then that these folks in Greece, for example, as well as these other areas, have to the French language and maybe to France?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. I mean, this is a period when there is, like you said, mass migration, specifically of Jews, Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe, from the Soviet Union to France. France was sort of considered this safe haven. It was the first European country to emancipate Jews, so so it sort of was looked at as the safe place to go. The situation's a little bit different for Ottoman Jews. During the 19th century, France and specifically French Jews sort of went on these civilizing missions around the southeastern Mediterranean and around North Africa to essentially Frenchify Jews who they saw as needing education in French language and French culture in order to themselves become emancipated and sort of civilized in their view. So they set up these schools, specifically this organization, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, that the Jews who I'm looking at, who then later immigrated to France, went to. So they were really fluent in the French language, they knew the French culture, so this was sort of a natural place for them to settle upon leaving. I'd like to ask you actually about your topic, so tell me a little bit about what you're looking at right now and how you came to it.
Sure. So the project that I'm currently developing right now, hopefully we'll be working on in depth the next couple of years, is looking at the evolution of everyday relations between Jews and non-Jews in Frankfurt am Main in Germany from roughly the start of the First World War until, and the end date is still sort of evolving right now, but until either the start of the Second World War or even until 1945, until the end of the Second World War, the end of the Holocaust. So really sort of trying to look at what is the evolution of Jewish integration into surrounding German society in this city, and at what point might we see this breaking down or continuing in sort of different spheres of everyday life?
Why Frankfurt? What's particular about this city?
So on one level, from the angle just for the Jewish community in Frankfurt, it is an incredibly diverse community that really emphasizes a kind of plurality of Jewish life in Germany that you don't frequently see. It's not simply some kind of a bourgeois, middle class, very sort of liberal-minded community. There's also a very strong Orthodox community, one of the first sort of separatist Orthodox Jewish communities. On top of this, there is the fact that there are roughly, I want to say maybe a fifth of the Jews there are immigrants from Eastern Europe. They're Yiddish speakers. Aside from this, something that I came across that's very interesting is that Jews are incredibly involved in politics in the city. The liberal parties and the Social Democrats control it really up until 1933, once the Nazis come to power. Aside from there, you have Jews very involved in philanthropic life in the city. Jews are among the main founders of the University of Frankfurt am Main in 1914. I just want to hear a little bit, I guess, about how you are going to be using the funds that you get from the Society of Fellows to further your research.
Yeah, sure. So I actually was able to go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC last summer, but really briefly. One particular collection that I found and and was really barely able to get into, was a collection of letters written during the Vichy years, so during the Second World War, by Jews originally from Turkey to the embassies of Spain, of Portugal, and of Turkey in France. And one thing that I didn't mention before is that this group is, in addition to being so linguistically plural, they're sort of legally plural as well. A lot of them had sort of inherited these protege papers from family members who had done business in Spain or in Portugal, and so they sort of had a legal connection to those countries as well. They're trying to claim citizenship during the war in order to get rescued, essentially, in order to be allowed to pass across the border into Spain or Portugal. So I want to go back to DC for a couple weeks and really get into those archives. Yeah, how about you? What is your plan for using the CES funds?
So something I came across last year when I was doing some preliminary research is that in 1940, Harvard University ran an essay competition that was to have people write essays underneath the theme "My Life in Germany Before and After January 30th, 1933." So this is the day that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. And they ended up having, I think, 120 different respondents submit essays to this, but also mock screenplays, these sort of interesting revenge novels, for example. And I was able to find one of these this past summer when I was doing some research at the Central Archives of the History of the Jewish People in Jerusalem, by a fellow by the name of David Friedrich Weil. He talks about driving in the mountains outside of Frankfurt and having to stop because of fog and being in a little wine tavern that Adolf Hitler comes into with a bunch of his cronies at one point in time. So what I'm planning to do is to use the money from the grant that I have from Duke University to go up to Cambridge and spend about a week or maybe 2 weeks looking at the other entries in this collection from Jews that are from Frankfurt. And just to sort of turn to the final question here, when you're looking forward, what do you think is the impact that your project might have on issues of French history, Ottoman history, but even just sort of wider debates that are even going on right now about things like refugees, about things like migration in the world?
So if we were to start with the impact on French history, we sort of understand French history, especially during the war, as being as sort of dividing Jews between French and foreign, and that in itself goes against the universalist motto of France, that once you're French, everyone is equal. So that divided that in two. But my project comes in and shows that divide to be much blurrier than we've thought. This group is both foreign and French at the same time. They're much more culturally and linguistically French than the Eastern European Jews, who are numerically dominant. And then I think on the level of sort of the refugee crisis that we have going in today, the idea of belonging, national belonging, this idea that these cultural elements that sort of seem intangible can really tangibly impact the trajectory of people's lives. That something like knowing the language, appearing to be assimilated, really can impact your life to the point of determining whether or not you survive a crisis. Tell me about the impact for your project.
Sure. So on just sort of the level of German Jewish history, one of the things that really inspired me to get involved in this project is that there's a kind of master narrative that's developed in a lot of the works on German Jewish history that point to World War I really as being sort of the end of any sort of positive move forward of Jewish integration in Germany, where after World War I or during the war, things just sort of fundamentally alter, whether it's a question of a rise of right-wing parties. Reading these things, I've just always felt that on one level, it has to be more complicated if you keep on looking at the local level. There's so much difference between these different cities. Additionally, the fact that I think that the way in which I'm hoping to tackle something like integration is maybe going to help us to rethink how this category has been viewed before. I mentioned sort of cultural life, economic life, social life before, but there's so many rich areas that a number of scholars recently have been pointing to that a kind of cultural turn approach might help us to broaden this out a little bit. So this sort of cultural level then about how Jews are even sort of embedded on this level within the actual geography of the city is something that I think can also be further reflective of this issue. And then sort of maybe widening things out from there as well too. This is a project that in many ways is about to what extent inter-ethnic, interconfessional relationships can really survive during a period when a liberal society starts to crumble. So thanks to you, and also I'll turn back to the camera right here. Thank you all very much at Duke University and the Council of European Studies for funding this research.